Tehran, late January 2018. A warehouse sits behind industrial fencing in the southern suburb of Karizak. Inside, 32 safes line reinforced walls. Each contains pieces of a program Iran swore it had abandoned 15 years earlier. The documents inside prove otherwise. Blueprints for warhead shells, neutron initiator designs, enrichment cascade configurations. At 2:47 a.m., 6 figures in dark clothing cut through the perimeter fence. They carry plasma torches, electronic jammers, and duffel bags. The alarm system has been mapped for months, but one miscalculation will trigger silent protocols that alert Revolutionary Guard posts 7 minutes away. The team has 4 hours to breach every safe, photograph, or extract every page, and vanish before dawn prayers. One safe contains a decoy stack. One alarm sensor wasn't in the blueprints. One guard is running 15 minutes ahead of his patrol schedule. How do you evacuate half a ton of classified material from the heart of a hostile capital when the entire operation depends on a window that's already closing? If precision operations and intelligence tradecraft pull you in, hit subscribe. Stories like this don't stay unclassified for long. Now rewind. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action collapsed the moment it was signed. Not in practice, but in the operational reality behind it. Iran's compliance meant nothing if the archive existed. For Mossad, the question wasn't whether Tehran had restarted weapons development. The question was what they'd never stopped. The AMAD project, officially terminated in 2003, left a paper trail. That trail lived in a nondescript facility in Karizak, buried in bureaucratic architecture designed to look civilian. Israeli intelligence tracked the site for years. Signals intercepts confirmed unusual security protocols. Aerial surveillance showed reinforced structures inconsistent with declared use. Human sources placed senior weapons scientists visiting the location during hours that didn't match administrative schedules. By 2017, Prime Minister Netanyahu needed more than allegations. He needed proof that would survive international scrutiny. Satellite images wouldn't do it. Defector testimony had credibility problems. The only evidence that mattered was the archive itself. But extracting classified documents from a secured site in Tehran wasn't a raid. It was a contradiction. You either go loud and fast, destroying the facility and losing the intelligence, or you go invisible and risk leaving traces that burn your entire network. Mossad chose the contradiction. They would take everything and leave no evidence they'd been there. The technical challenges multiplied immediately. The safes were Iranian-manufactured Kaveh models, resistant to thermal cutting and equipped with relockers that sealed tighter if tampered with. The alarm system ran on closed-circuit wiring, not wireless, which meant jamming wouldn't work. The facility had no blind spots. Guard rotations overlapped at irregular intervals. The nearest Mossad safe house was 63 kilometers away. Exfiltration routes crossed checkpoints that could be locked down in under 10 minutes. The operational brief identified 3 constraints. First, the team had to avoid lethal force. Dead guards meant immediate lockdown and a manhunt that would compromise every asset in country. Second, they couldn't leave behind any equipment that might indicate foreign involvement. Iranian forensics could trace specialty tools back to manufacturers. Third, the extraction window was fixed. The next shift change wouldn't happen for another 72 hours, and by then, intelligence suggested the archive might be moved. The decision wasn't whether to go, it was whether the tradecraft existed to make it survivable. The first break came from a logistics contractor. He worked for a company that serviced climate control systems across government facilities. His security clearance was low enough to avoid suspicion, but high enough to access maintenance schedules. Mossad recruited him through a front company bidding on HVAC contracts. He didn't know he was being run. The intelligence he provided was technical: blueprints for ventilation, power distribution, and secondary alarm circuits that weren't in the primary security architecture. That data revealed something unexpected. The facility's backup power system had a 12-second delay during switchover. If the main power failed, alarms would go dark for exactly 12 seconds before the generators kicked in. The second break was human. An archive clerk rotated out after 18 months. His departure was clean, no flags, standard reassignment. 6 months later, he responded to a job posting in Turkey. The company was a shell. The interview was an elicitation. He didn't reveal classified details, but he confirmed the safes were old models, not biometric. The locks were mechanical combination systems. That meant they could be manipulated with the right tools and enough time. He also mentioned something operational planners hadn't anticipated. The facility stored hard drives separately from paper files. The digital archive was kept in a climate-controlled room with independent access logs. The third break was operational timing. Iranian security runs on bureaucratic rhythm. Annual audits happened in March. That meant January was the administrative dead zone, when facilities operated on minimal staffing and delayed maintenance requests stacked up. Guard contractors filed grievances about unpaid overtime. Power outages in the district spiked during winter months due to grid load. The confluence created a window, not a large one, but survivable if every variable lined up. But two constraints remained unsolved. First, how do you move 100,000 documents out of a facility without vehicles that could be traced? Standard exfiltration meant multiple trips, and multiple trips meant multiplied exposure. Second, the guard rotation schedule had one anomaly. Every third night, a supervisor conducted random sweeps at unpredictable intervals. If he showed up during the breach, the operation collapsed. Mossad couldn't bribe him. He was ideologically committed. They couldn't blackmail him. His background was clean. The only option was to predict his movements based on behavioral patterns. That meant surveillance, and surveillance meant risk. The planning team spent 4 months building a pattern of life analysis on the supervisor. He lived 23 minutes from the facility. He stopped for tea at the same cafe on sweep nights. His vehicle took the same route. The predictability created a margin. If the team could trigger a delay at the cafe, a blocked road, or a flat tire, they could push his arrival time back by 15 to 20 minutes. That margin would give the breach team enough buffer to finish and clear the site before he arrived. The decision point came in early January. Intelligence confirmed the archive would be relocated by mid-February. The operational window closed to 3 weeks. The breach had to happen on January 31st, the only night when guard staffing dropped to minimum levels, and the supervisor's routine aligned with the forecasted power grid strain. The team would enter at 2:47 a.m., the exact midpoint between patrol cycles. They had 4 hours and 13 minutes before sunrise. The exfiltration route required 3 vehicles staged at staggered intervals, each with clean plates and sterile interiors. The drivers wouldn't know what they were carrying. The destination was a warehouse in a commercial district, where a Mossad logistics cell would process the material before moving it out of the country in shipping containers labeled as industrial machinery parts. But one variable remained uncontrolled. The facility's interior cameras fed to a monitoring station 12 kilometers away. The cameras couldn't be disabled without alerting operators. The team couldn't mask their presence on video. The solution was misdirection. They would trigger a false alarm at a government building across the city 30 minutes before the breach. The alarm would pull monitoring attention away from Karizak long enough for the team to enter and begin work. By the time operators realized the alarm was false and refocused, the breach team would already be inside the safes. The question wasn't whether the misdirection would work. The question was whether 4 hours was enough time to do what had never been done before. The team assembled in a safe house 40 kilometers north of Tehran on January 30th. 6 operators, all native Farsi speakers with Iranian identity documents that would survive casual inspection but not deep scrutiny. None of them knew each other's real names. Communications would be minimal once they left the safe house. The operational plan existed in segments. Each operator knew their phase and the contingency for their phase. Nobody knew the full picture except the mission commander, who would remain outside the facility coordinating timing. The equipment list was surgical. 12 miniature plasma torches designed to cut through safe hinges without triggering thermal sensors. Electronic stethoscopes for detecting tumbler positions in mechanical locks. Portable LED arrays that mimicked ambient facility lighting to avoid shadow anomalies on camera. Collapsible nylon duffel bags treated with anti-static coating to prevent document damage. Handheld scanners capable of photographing documents at 4 pages per second. And one piece of equipment that didn't exist in any inventory. A custom signal jammer designed to create interference in the specific frequency range used by the facility's motion sensors, but only for 12-second intervals that matched the backup power delay. The night before the operation, the mission commander received updated intelligence. The supervisor's routine had changed. He'd skipped the cafe the previous week. Behavioral analysis suggested fatigue or personal issues, but the pattern break introduced uncertainty. The team couldn't abort. The archive relocation was confirmed for February 14th. This was the last viable window. The commander made the call. Proceed, but compress the timeline. Instead of 4 hours inside the facility, they'd have 3 hours and 40 minutes. The margin disappeared. At 1:37 a.m. on January 31st, the false alarm triggered across the city. A smoke detector in a Ministry of Intelligence administrative building activated, pulling security response and monitoring station attention east. The breach team left the staging vehicle at 2:19 a.m. and approached the perimeter fence on foot. The facility sat in an industrial zone with minimal street lighting. Surrounding buildings were warehouses, mostly empty at night. The nearest active business was a textile factory 300 meters away, far enough that noise wouldn't carry. The fence was chain link, topped with razor wire, standard commercial grade, not military. The first operator used bolt cutters to create an opening low to the ground, behind a utility box that blocked sight lines from the nearest camera. The cut took 90 seconds. The team moved through one at a time, staying below the camera's angle of view. They crossed open ground to the facility's side entrance, a reinforced steel door with a mechanical lock and magnetic sensor. The lock was pickable, but the magnetic sensor would trigger if the door opened while the alarm was active. The solution required precision timing. At 2:47 a.m., the team's technical specialist activated a localized electromagnetic pulse device. It wasn't powerful enough to damage electronics, but it created interference in the sensor's signal for approximately 8 seconds. During that window, the second operator picked the lock. The door opened. They slipped inside and closed it before the sensor reset. The alarm system registered no breach. The team was inside. The interior was exactly as the blueprints indicated. A long corridor led to the main archive room. Emergency lighting cast green shadows along the walls. The air smelled like concrete and old paper. 2 security cameras covered the corridor, one at each end. The team moved in single file, staying close to the wall where the camera angle created a blind spot 6 inches wide. They reached the archive room door in 40 seconds. This door had a different lock, a combination dial with a 6-digit code that changed weekly. The team didn't have the current code. What they had was a technique called manipulation. The third operator pressed a stethoscope against the lock housing and began turning the dial slowly. Mechanical combination locks produce faint clicks when tumblers align. With practice, those clicks can be isolated. It took 11 minutes to decode all 6 digits. The door opened at 2:58 a.m. The clock was running. The archive room was larger than expected. Metal shelving units lined 3 walls, packed with document boxes labeled in Farsi. The safes occupied the 4th wall, arranged in 2 rows. 32 safes, each approximately 1 meter tall. The digital storage room was behind a separate door at the back. The team split immediately. 3 operators began working the safes. 2 moved to the digital room. 1 stayed in the corridor as lookout, monitoring the entrance and the guard rotation schedule. The safes presented the primary challenge. Each one required individual breaching. The plasma torches could cut through the hinges, but the process generated heat that might trigger thermal sensors embedded in the ceiling. The solution was controlled bursts. 5-second cuts followed by 30-second cooling periods. The technique was slow, but undetectable. The first safe took 18 minutes to open. Inside were folders containing technical drawings, calculations, and photographs of components. The operator photographed each page using the handheld scanner, then carefully replaced everything in original order. The safe was resealed using adhesive strips that mimicked factory welds under cursory inspection. By 3:32 a.m., 4 safes were open. The team's pace was too slow. At the current rate, they'd finish 12 safes maximum before the extraction deadline. The mission commander, monitoring from outside via encrypted radio, made a decision. Abandon the photographic approach for half the safes. Instead, extract the physical documents. It violated the original plan, which emphasized leaving no trace, but time was collapsing. The operators shifted tactics. Safes 5 through 16 would be emptied completely. The contents went into the duffel bags. The digital storage room presented a different problem. The hard drives were stored in a climate-controlled cabinet with its own alarm system. The cabinet's lock was electronic, requiring a keycard and PIN code. The team didn't have either. What they had was a bypass technique. The fifth operator removed the cabinet's access panel and used alligator clips to bridge the locking mechanism's circuit board. The cabinet opened at 3:51 a.m. Inside were 43 hard drives, each labeled with dates and project codes. The drives were small, 2.5-inch form factor, easy to transport. All 43 went into a separate bag. At 4:06 a.m., the lookout operator signaled. Vehicle approaching from the south. The supervisor's car, 14 minutes ahead of projected schedule. The team had 3 options: abort and leave half the safes unopened, continue and risk confrontation, or create a diversion that bought them 10 more minutes. The mission commander chose the diversion. A secondary team, staged 2 kilometers away, triggered a small fire in a dumpster behind the textile factory. Not large enough to require fire services, but visible enough to pull the supervisor's attention. He stopped his vehicle to investigate. The breach team gained 9 minutes. They used every second. Safes 17 through 28 were breached in rapid sequence. The contents were photographed or extracted based on volume. Larger document sets went into bags. Smaller files were scanned. By 4:33 a.m., the team had cleared 28 of 32 safes. The final 4 were positioned highest on the wall, requiring a stepladder. There was no time. The decision was made to leave them. The exfiltration began at 4:37 a.m. The duffel bags, now containing approximately 55,000 pages of documents and 43 hard drives, weighed over 200 kilograms total. The team couldn't carry everything at once. They made 2 trips. First load went out at 4:39 a.m. The operators retraced their entry route through the corridor, out the side door, across open ground to the fence. A vehicle was waiting 30 meters beyond the perimeter. The bags were loaded in 40 seconds. The vehicle departed immediately. The second load presented the complication. At 4:48 a.m., as the remaining operators prepared to exit with the final bags, the supervisor's vehicle returned. He'd finished investigating the dumpster fire and resumed his route to the facility. He was now 6 minutes from the entrance. The team couldn't wait. They had to move while he was still distant enough not to see them. The operators exited the building, bags in hand, and moved toward the fence. They were halfway across open ground when headlights appeared on the access road. The supervisor's vehicle turned into the facility parking area. The breach team dropped flat behind a concrete drainage culvert. The bags were too large to hide. If the supervisor walked the perimeter, he'd see them immediately. But he didn't walk the perimeter. He parked, exited his vehicle, and went directly to the main entrance on the opposite side of the building. His routine was predictable. Unlock the front door, check the interior, sign the logbook, leave. That process took 8 to 12 minutes. The team had that window to clear the fence and reach the extraction vehicle. They moved the moment the supervisor disappeared inside. The bags went through the fence opening first, dragged by operators already on the outside. The final operator squeezed through at 4:56 a.m. The extraction vehicle was idling with lights off. They loaded the remaining bags and departed south. The entire exfiltration, from exit to vehicle departure, took 9 minutes. By 5:07 a.m., both vehicles were 8 kilometers from the facility, moving towards separate routes that converged at the warehouse staging point. Inside the archive room, the evidence of entry was minimal. 28 safes showed signs of tampering if inspected closely, but casual observation revealed nothing. The digital storage cabinet was closed and appeared undisturbed. The side entrance door was locked. The fence cut was behind the utility box, invisible unless someone specifically looked for it. The team had left no equipment, no fingerprints, no biological trace. The operation was designed to remain undetected for days, possibly weeks, long enough for the material to leave Iran entirely. But one variable remained unresolved. The security cameras had recorded everything. Not clearly, but enough. Figures moving through corridors, operators working on safes. The timestamp would show exactly when the breach occurred. When Iranian security reviewed the footage, they'd know. The question wasn't whether they'd discover the breach. The question was how long Mossad had before discovery triggered a response that could intercept the material before it crossed the border. The warehouse staging point was a logistics facility in the Shar-e-Qods industrial district, 12 kilometers west of the breach site. The building belonged to a shell company registered in Dubai, ostensibly importing construction materials. The interior had been prepared weeks earlier: sorting tables, industrial scanners, vacuum-sealed document cases, and shipping containers pre-labeled with customs documentation for machinery parts destined for Europe. The Mossad logistics cell waiting inside consisted of 4 specialists trained in document processing and chain of custody protocols. They had 6 hours to catalog, scan, and pack 100,000 pages before the material had to move. The first extraction vehicle arrived at 5:23 a.m. The second pulled in 4 minutes later. The duffel bags were unloaded and moved immediately to the sorting tables. The logistics team began processing while the breach operators changed clothes, disposed of their operational gear in an incinerator behind the building, and prepared for secondary exfiltration. Their role was finished. Staying in Tehran increased exposure. Each operator would leave the city separately over the next 48 hours, using different routes and cover identities. The document processing revealed the scale of what they'd taken: technical schematics for warhead integration, metallurgical analysis of uranium enrichment, communications between weapons scientists and military officials, procurement records for dual-use materials, test data from explosive compression experiments. The AMAD project wasn't dormant. It had evolved into compartmented sub-programs with sanitized names that obscured their purpose. The documents proved continuity of intent. They also contained names, locations, and timelines that mapped Iran's entire nuclear weapons infrastructure. The hard drives presented a separate challenge. Their contents couldn't be accessed on-site without risk of triggering embedded security protocols. Some drives might contain encryption that would wipe data if tampered with incorrectly. The decision was made to transport them untouched. A signals intelligence team in Tel Aviv would handle forensic extraction. The drives were placed in anti-static cases and packed into a separate container with shock-absorbing foam. By 8:37 a.m., the first shipping container was loaded and sealed. It contained 60,000 pages of scanned and vacuum-packed documents, organized by subject matter and date. The container was scheduled to leave Tehran by truck at 11 a.m., heading northwest toward the Turkish border. The route would take 16 hours. The truck driver was an unwitting participant, hired through a legitimate freight company. He believed he was transporting industrial equipment. The container's customs paperwork was flawless, produced by a Mossad document specialist who'd replicated Iranian export stamps and signatures. The second container, holding the remaining documents and hard drives, was scheduled for a different route. It would travel south to Bandar Abbas, then by ship to a port in Oman. The sea route was slower but less scrutinized. Overland crossings meant checkpoints, inspections, and potential delays. Maritime shipping meant the material would sit in a container yard for days, but once loaded onto a vessel, it was effectively untouchable until it reached international waters. At 9:14 a.m., Iranian security at the Karizak facility discovered the breach. The supervisor had completed his sweep and departed at 5:18 a.m. without noticing anything unusual. The breach remained undetected for another 3 hours and 56 minutes. Discovery came during the morning shift change. A junior security officer conducting a routine walkthrough noticed scuff marks on the archive room floor near the safes. He investigated closer and saw the adhesive strips on the hinges. The alarm was raised immediately. Within 20 minutes, a forensic team from the Ministry of Intelligence arrived. They reviewed security camera footage and identified 6 individuals entering the facility at 2:47 a.m. The faces weren't clear, but body mechanics and equipment indicated professional training. The sophistication of the breach pointed to foreign intelligence. The initial assessment concluded Mossad, though confirmation would take days. The forensic team documented tampered safes, missing documents, and the breached digital storage cabinet. The estimate placed the stolen material at over 50,000 pages and multiple hard drives. The Iranian response escalated rapidly. By 10:41 a.m., security protocols locked down border crossings. Vehicles carrying commercial cargo faced enhanced inspections. Customs officials received descriptions of shipping containers potentially linked to the breach. Though the descriptions were generic, metal construction, standard dimensions, paperwork listing machinery parts. Tehran's intelligence apparatus activated networks across the region, alerting assets in Turkey, Iraq, and the Gulf states to watch for suspicious freight movements. But the lockdown came too late for the first container. It had departed Tehran at 11:03 a.m., 14 minutes after the scheduled departure time due to traffic. By the time border security received the alert at 10:41 a.m., the truck was already 73 kilometers from the city, moving through rural highways with minimal checkpoints. The driver maintained standard speed, stopping once for fuel and continuing northwest. At the Turkish border crossing near Bazargan, customs inspectors flagged the container for inspection, based on the new directive. The inspection began at 6:32 p.m. Two customs officers opened the container and examined the contents. What they saw matched the paperwork: vacuum-sealed industrial components, metal parts, technical equipment. The vacuum-sealed bags obscured the documents inside. The officers checked serial numbers against the manifest, found no discrepancies, and cleared the container. The truck crossed into Turkey at 7:09 p.m. 12 hours later, the container was transferred to a freight railway heading toward Europe. 72 hours after the breach, the material reached a Mossad processing facility in Eastern Europe. The second container faced different obstacles. The ship carrying it departed Bandar Abbas on February 2nd, 2 days after the breach. Iranian naval intelligence monitored all outbound vessels during the lockdown period, but their focus was on passenger ships and small craft capable of rapid transit. Commercial cargo vessels received less attention. The ship reached Omani waters on February 4th without incident. In Muscat, the container was offloaded and transferred to another vessel bound for the Mediterranean. That leg took 9 days. On February 13th, the container arrived at a port in Cyprus, where a Mossad logistics team took possession. Back in Tehran, the forensic investigation intensified. Iranian intelligence pulled phone records, reviewed satellite imagery, and interrogated facility staff. The HVAC contractor who'd provided blueprints was identified as a potential leak. He disappeared before interrogation. His disappearance confirmed suspicion, but provided no leads. The archive clerk who'd revealed details about the safes was traced to Turkey, but by the time Iranian operatives located him, he'd moved again. The intelligence failure was compounding. Iranian leadership faced a decision: acknowledge the breach publicly and risk international embarrassment, or suppress it and prevent panic within the nuclear program. The initial choice was suppression. Internal communications ordered silence. Scientists working on compartmented programs were reassigned without explanation. Facilities linked to the stolen documents were relocated or shut down. The strategy was containment, but containment required knowing what was taken. The forensic team's inventory was incomplete. Some safes had been photographed, leaving originals behind. Others had been emptied entirely. The uncertainty paralyzed decision-making. By mid-February, Iranian intelligence concluded the breach was irreversible. The material was gone, likely in Israeli hands. The question shifted from recovery to damage control. What would Mossad do with the archive? The answer came on April 30th, 2018. Prime Minister Netanyahu held a televised presentation in Tel Aviv, displaying documents and diagrams taken from the Karizak facility. He presented technical details, procurement records, and communications that proved Iran's nuclear weapons program was active. The presentation was theatrical, but effective. International media covered it extensively. Diplomatic pressure on Iran increased. The Iranian response was denial. Officials claimed the documents were fabricated or outdated, but the specificity of the material undermined that narrative. Serial numbers, signatures, and technical data matched known programs. Intelligence agencies in the United States and Europe assessed the documents as authentic. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. European signatories to the nuclear deal faced pressure to renegotiate terms. Sanctions discussions resumed. Iran's position weakened. Internally, the breach triggered a counterintelligence purge. Security protocols across nuclear facilities were overhauled. Personnel with access to sensitive sites faced polygraph examinations. Foreign contractors were removed from government projects. The Intelligence Ministry launched investigations into asset networks, but the damage was systemic. Mossad's penetration had been deeper than initially assessed. The breach wasn't just about documents. It exposed vulnerabilities in Iran's security infrastructure that would take years to repair. The operational cost for Mossad was significant but manageable. 3 assets inside Iran were burned when their communications were intercepted during the investigation. 2 were exfiltrated successfully. 1 was arrested and later executed. The breach team suffered no casualties, but their identities were compromised to varying degrees. None could operate in Iran again. The mission commander rotated out of active operations. The logistics network used for the operation was dismantled. The cost was high, but the intelligence value justified it. For the analysts processing the archive, the work continued for months. The documents revealed not just what Iran had built, but how they'd built it. Procurement chains showed which companies supplied dual-use materials. Communications identified key personnel and decision-makers. Technical data mapped production capabilities and timelines. The archive became a reference database for tracking Iran's nuclear program going forward. Every new development could be cross-referenced against stolen blueprints. Every denial could be fact-checked against internal documents. But one question remained unanswered in the immediate aftermath. How had Mossad known exactly where the archive was stored? The facility wasn't marked on any map. Its purpose wasn't declared. The location was compartmented within Iranian intelligence. The only explanation was a source deep inside the program, someone with access to information that didn't exist in normal channels. That source was never identified publicly, but the breach's precision suggested they were still active. For Iran, that uncertainty was more damaging than the stolen documents. Somewhere in their system, an asset was feeding information to Tel Aviv, and they had no way to find them. The archive's arrival in Tel Aviv triggered an intelligence processing operation larger than the breach itself. Mossad established a task force of 37 analysts, translators, and technical specialists to work through the material. The operation was compartmented. Teams worked on specific document sets without seeing the full picture. Only senior analysts had access to the complete archive. The processing facility operated under blackout conditions. No external communications, no personal devices, 12-hour shifts with mandatory psychological evaluations every 72 hours. The first priority was verification. Intelligence services treat captured documents with suspicion until provenance is confirmed. The concern wasn't that Iran had planted false information. The timeline didn't allow for that level of deception. The concern was whether the documents represented active programs or historical artifacts. Some files dated back to 2003, when the AMAD project was officially terminated. Others were recent, dated within months of the breach. The analysts cross-referenced dates, signatures, and technical details against known intelligence to build a timeline of continuous development. What emerged was a picture of organizational adaptation. After 2003, when international pressure forced Iran to publicly abandon weapons research, the program didn't stop. It fragmented. Compartmented teams worked on isolated components under civilian cover. Metallurgy research happened at universities. Explosive testing was labeled as mining applications. Warhead design continued under aerospace programs. The compartmentation made detection harder, but left a paper trail. The archive connected those fragments into a coherent weapons development timeline. The technical documents provided the most actionable intelligence. Blueprints for neutron initiators revealed specific design choices that indicated progress toward miniaturization. That meant Iran was working on warheads small enough to fit on ballistic missiles, not just crude devices that required large delivery systems. Enrichment cascade data showed production rates and efficiency levels that exceeded what Iran had declared to international inspectors. The discrepancy wasn't small. Iran's actual enrichment capacity was approximately 40% higher than declared figures. The procurement records exposed supply chains. Companies in China, North Korea, and Eastern Europe had provided components that violated international sanctions. The documents listed part numbers, delivery dates, and financial transactions. That intelligence gave Western governments leverage. Sanctions could be targeted against specific entities. Diplomatic pressure could be applied to countries hosting those companies. The archive turned abstract concerns about proliferation into concrete enforcement opportunities. But the documents also revealed failures. Several programs described in the archive had stalled due to technical problems or resource constraints. Iran's progress wasn't linear. they faced the same engineering challenges that slowed weapons development in other countries. Materials science limitations, precision manufacturing difficulties, testing constraints. The archive showed ambition, but also frustration. In one memo, a senior scientist complained about equipment failures delaying experiments by 18 months. That context mattered for threat assessment. Iran was advancing, but not as rapidly as worst-case projections suggested. The hard drives required specialized forensic analysis. Each drive was cloned before extraction to preserve the original in case of data loss. The clones were processed in isolated systems with no network connectivity. Some drives contained encrypted partitions that took weeks to crack. Others held communications between scientists, revealing personal tensions and bureaucratic conflicts within the program. One email chain discussed security concerns about foreign intelligence penetration. The irony wasn't lost on the analysts reading it in Tel Aviv. The video files on the drives were particularly valuable. Iran had documented test explosions, used to refine implosion techniques for compressing fissile material. The footage showed test chambers, diagnostic equipment, and results. Weapons designers could analyze the videos to assess how close Iran was to achieving the precision required for a functioning nuclear weapon. The assessment concluded Iran had mastered basic implosion physics, but struggled with symmetry. Their tests showed uneven compression, which would reduce yield efficiency. That technical gap meant Iran was still years away from a deployable weapon, assuming no external assistance. By June 2018, the task force had processed 87% of the archive. The remaining material was either duplicates or administrative documents with limited intelligence value. The core findings were compiled into a classified assessment, distributed to Israeli leadership, and shared selectively with American intelligence. The assessment's conclusion was blunt. Iran's nuclear weapons program was active, advancing, and more sophisticated than publicly acknowledged. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action had slowed but not stopped development. The strategic impact of the breach extended beyond intelligence collection. It changed the regional calculation. Iran now knew their most sensitive secrets were compromised. That knowledge forced operational changes. Facilities mentioned in the archive were relocated. Personnel were rotated. Communication protocols were overhauled. But those changes came with costs. Relocating research facilities disrupted timelines. Rotating experienced personnel reduced program efficiency. The breach didn't just expose Iran's capabilities, it degraded them. For Mossad, the operation validated a strategic approach to intelligence work. High-risk penetration operations could yield disproportionate results. The archive provided years of actionable intelligence from a single night's work, but the approach also highlighted vulnerabilities. The operation required deep asset penetration, extensive surveillance, and precise timing. Any one failure point would have collapsed the mission. The success bred confidence but also caution. Operations of this complexity couldn't be repeated frequently without burning networks and exposing methodologies. The political aftermath was equally complex. Netanyahu's public presentation of the documents in April generated international attention, but it also revealed Israel's hand. By showcasing the material so explicitly, Israel confirmed they had conducted the breach. Iran now knew not just that they'd been penetrated, but how deeply. The presentation served a political purpose, building international pressure on Iran, but it came at an operational cost. Future intelligence operations in Iran would face heightened scrutiny and improved counterintelligence measures. The archive also created a strategic dilemma. Possessing proof of Iran's weapons program was valuable, but using that proof required calculated disclosure. Release too much, and you reveal intelligence methods. Release too little, and the material loses credibility. The balance required constant recalibration. In the years following the breach, Israeli officials selectively leaked specific documents to journalists and foreign governments. Each leak timed to influence diplomatic negotiations or justify military posturing. The human cost of the operation remained classified. The asset executed in Iran was never publicly identified. His family received no acknowledgement. The two assets successfully exfiltrated were resettled in countries that don't extradite to Iran, but their lives were permanently severed from everything they'd known. The breach operators continued working in intelligence roles, though never again in Iran. The psychological toll of operating in hostile territory under threat of capture and execution doesn't end when the mission succeeds. Some operators required extended leave. One left Mossad entirely within a year of the operation. For Iran's nuclear scientists, the breach had professional consequences. Several individuals named in the documents faced internal investigations. Some were reassigned to administrative roles with no technical responsibilities. Others disappeared from public life entirely. The atmosphere within Iran's nuclear program shifted from cautious optimism to paranoid suspicion. Collaboration between teams decreased. Information sharing became restricted. The breach didn't just steal documents, it poisoned the institutional culture needed for complex scientific work. The long-term effectiveness of the operation remains debated within intelligence communities. Did the breach slow Iran's nuclear program, or did it simply force adaptation? Did the public disclosure strengthen international resolve, or did it galvanize Iranian determination? The evidence suggests both outcomes occurred simultaneously. Iran's weapons development slowed in the immediate aftermath, as facilities relocated and security protocols tightened. But by 2020, satellite imagery and signals intelligence indicated research had resumed at new locations with improved compartmentation. The archive itself continues to provide intelligence value years after the breach. As Iran develops new capabilities, analysts compare current intelligence against the stolen baseline. When Iran announced advances in enrichment efficiency in 2023, analysts cross-referenced the claims against blueprints from the archive. The comparison revealed Iran had achieved targets outlined in documents from 2017, confirming the archive's accuracy and providing a benchmark for future developments. The operation also influenced Mossad's institutional priorities. The success validated investments in technical training, asset cultivation, and operational planning. But it also exposed dependencies. The breach required precise intelligence about facility layout, guard schedules, and alarm systems. That intelligence came from human sources and surveillance operations built over years. The lesson was clear. High-impact operations require sustained intelligence infrastructure. You can't execute a mission like Kharazak on short notice. The preparation determines success or failure. For students of intelligence tradecraft, the operation demonstrates the tension between stealth and speed. The team needed to breach 32 safes in under 4 hours while leaving minimal evidence. Those requirements conflicted. Stealth meant careful, time-consuming work. Speed meant accepting risk and leaving traces. The operational compromise, photographing some safes and emptying others, reflected real-time decision-making under pressure. Perfect operational security wasn't achievable. The goal was survivable imperfection. The broader question remains whether high-visibility intelligence operations serve their intended purpose. The archive proved Iran's nuclear ambitions, but proof didn't stop the program. International sanctions increased, but Iran adapted. Diplomatic isolation intensified, but domestic support for nuclear development hardened. The breach succeeded operationally, but faced strategic limits. Intelligence can inform policy, but it can't determine outcomes. That gap between tactical success and strategic impact defines the challenge of modern intelligence work. Does exposing a nuclear weapons program through a high-risk intelligence operation actually force policy changes, or does it simply accelerate the target's operational security improvements while hardening their resolve? When does the value of captured intelligence outweigh the cost of burning human assets and revealing collection methods? What would you do differently if you were running the operation? Prioritize complete document extraction with higher exposure risk, or focus on targeted material with cleaner exfiltration? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if operations like this keep you coming back, hit subscribe and like. More stories where intelligence work meets high-stakes execution coming soon.